Last talk of the session is going to be from Craig Lee.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're sitting here on the eve of the IOP, getting ready to go to sea, and it seemed like a good time to recap, pull back a little bit, and talk about what our overall observing plan is. I think there's been a little bit of confusion about exactly what the resources are, what the mix of things we might be doing, some extent even what the questions might be. So I thought we'd step back, take a look at what we talked about last time we gathered, and put together a plan in preparation for a longer discussion, either at lunch or following this afternoon. So let's start with a look at the science questions that we chose. These could clearly benefit from more discussion, I think. The presentations have really helped, I think, clarify thinking about what we ought to be doing, but perhaps through the course of this afternoon, we might refine these to the point where we had some testable hypotheses in the mix, or at least some sharper questions. But we had two general overarching questions that came out the last time we discussed the observing program. One was to look at the mechanisms that govern SST during the intermonsoon oscillations in the Central Bay of Bengal, kind of in the primary observing area. If you recall, if we go back, we talked about looking at both the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, where a lot of these things start. We ended up deciding to focus on the Bay of Bengal to concentrate resources where we weren't too spread out. I'll show you some pictures. Luke showed you the glider observations that were in the Arabian Sea previously. The original glider plans for Mesobob involved putting some glider lines in the Arabian Sea. I think we've probably done the right thing by concentrating. These are the questions that we've been looking at over the course of the past couple of days and over the workshop as well, about what governs freshwater and heat transport, what sets the SST, what the role of surface forcing is relative to the action of salt and heat. Jared had something to say about that earlier that I think was apropos to what we're trying to do, what we will try to do in the coming season. The diurnal cycle plays large in this. Right, the questions about how we resolve that, how much effort we throw at it, and what scales we're going to look at it in. There are questions about the scales between the large basin scales that we would like to cover and the process scales that we tend to like to focus on. Right, if we want to see some of these phase relationships, we need to look over a large area. If we want to understand the processes, we probably need to look over a smaller area. It I think is worth revisiting the questions we wrote down last time we talked in preparation for talking further about what we want to do, how we want to sharpen the measurement program. Observational assets. I've tried to summarize everything that I believe we have based on the previous discussion and discussions have happened here this week. The primary assets in terms of process studies are going to be the Sally Ride rather than the Ravel. This time the Ride is a smaller vessel and should be working in fairly rough conditions, which may have some implications to what you can get done out there in the time that's allotted. In addition to that, there are some autonomous assets associated with the Ride that we put out. 3 large, heavily drove drifting buoys, flux buoys that Tom Farrar is leading. Those will be able to make high quality measurements in 3 locations and maybe serve as the centrum for additional autonomous measurements. The ship being a 4th site, so there's an opportunity to have some spatial distribution between those 4 assets. The downside of that is Emily and I were talking about last night, is that those 3 buoys need to be recovered and they are going to drift. And they can't drift into anybody else's EEZ over the course of the program, which means that the fairly close tabs will have to be kept on them and will have to be put someplace where they won't rapidly drift out of international waters. They're wire walkers. I didn't have a beat on the number of wire walkers we're going, but multiples, I assume.
On the collaboration with the Tom. So there will not be wire walkers that are dependent on Tom.
Okay, so they're just going under the buoys, but no drifting. Okay. Ross will be out there, the Thomas kayak, and then a total of 4 gliders for deployment during the IOP. And the idea is these would be deployed during the first leg, during Himantha's leg, of the ride cruises and recovered at the end of the second leg. 2 turbulence gliders, 2 sprays. We got the number wrong, Lou?
No, you're good. So
Okay.
2 from Robert Todd.
Right,
Yeah.
2 from you guys.
Your gliders are in. What about, and yours are already in?
Yeah, they're under the longer term sampling
Yeah, understood.
category. And then for assets doing longer term sampling, there's an expanded meteorological network. I'll show you a map of the stations that have been enhanced, that we believe are being enhanced for the purpose of this program. The omnibuoys, the Indian omnibuoys, the Rama moorings running along the EEZ. Heavily instrumented Inkois mooring at 18 North, which is the Inkois version of the Hui mooring. Then all Rio Miso moorings, and I think there are 4 of those in the water right now. I may have the count wrong. There are more than that on the list to be deployed, but 5? Okay. 2 pressure inverted echo sounders. Vuves running along that southern line, depending on what gets turned and redeployed in the near term to be out during the IOP. Large number of surface drifters. And then 2, hopefully 3 gliders, sea gliders that will be out for a much longer period. 1 which hopefully will be working the southern line by the time the ships get out there. 2 that we're expecting to deploy from the first cruise, but that will stay out well past the end of the IOP after the ride leaves the area. So that gives you an idea of the scope of the assets that are available. They can be used in different ways. We have a plan that we put up. It's a straw plan. I'll show you that in a moment. But we should be talking about that. This is our last chance to really talk about that plan. So quickly, this is I drew this from the science plan we put together about half a year ago, I think, at this point. These were the enhanced surface stations. I think Joe and others have been working on augmenting. It's the idea that there would be additional radio sound launches from those stations during the IOP. Okay. All right, we should get those on that map. That's the straw plan of how we thought we might use the in situ observing assets. Some of these things are fairly self-explanatory, but let's just walk through it for clarity. The existing glider lines and PIES lines off of Sri Lanka are these 2. Right now, this is the only line that still has gliders operating on it, and we intend to maintain that line. PIES are operating on both of those lines. Which ones are you pulling, Uwe? I'm sorry. Which ones are? Okay, so these are, right. But those may or may not be there through the IOP, depending on what. There will not be gliders operating on that line during the IOP. Inkois mooring up here. The Rio Miso moorings are these moorings along this line. And I think the ones that actually got deployed are in this L. I'm not sure that southern one actually. Right. Actually got deployed during the pilot. These are in now, but they won't be in during the IOP. So supporting data, but not contemporaneous data with the work that we're doing. NIOT moorings are these dots down the center here, and the Rama moorings are these dots. And the Rama moorings are the triangles along this side. The northernmost Rama mooring has been augmented with additional instrumentation. And the proposal for the additional gliders were to run the shorter term gliders, the Hui sprays and long lines down the center of the basin, perhaps 2 parallel lines, an eastern line and a western line, to use hopefully Inkois's gliders to operate around the Inkois mooring at 18 North, and then use 2 of the APL gliders to operate around 2 of the NIOT moorings. So now we've got sort of mini upper ocean experiments in 3 different locations, and we can look at the phasing between those 3 locations, as well as the smaller scale dynamics between the moorings and the gliders. That's, that is kind of it in a nutshell for what we discussed.
I like the plan, but just looking at the spread,
Mm.
it would be better to have the sprays fill in the gap between the two buoys rather than have them hold up that way.
Do you think there's only one Incois?
Sorry,
Buoy.
two nylon buoys?
There are these three, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So between the two APLUW, you better have the sprays run from the southern mooring north in that like one column to the other.
Maybe. The one issue is they're not out there beyond just the cruise period. Robert? Yeah. Right. No more than 60 days. Robert's battered for 100, but he probably can't get back to Sri Lanka in that time. Right. So we're hoping to be able to field 3. And the 3 would be that one, and this.
We'll say on that context, I mean, I kind of like the idea of having some latitudinal aperture from those, but Tom and I have spoken about the risks involved with being far enough away from them that we can't rescue them. And I think both of us have some tolerance for risk there. I do think that I might be wrong here, but I do believe that if the buoys go out of international waters, there's nothing precluding us from collecting them. It is the issue is that the data that is collected once they are in international waters we can't use. But it doesn't mean necessarily that we have to break off whatever we're doing the instant we think it's going to cross into territorial waters. So I think that that, and I will say that Tom also communicated to me that he is moderately confident in his new droguing scheme, which obviously the proof can only be assessed after it's actually deployed. But we have some hope that we'll be able to at least do some prediction of the way that these things are going to move with the mesoscale. So that all say is that I think that we need to think about the science questions, as 1A, and the kind of the logistical aspects of, obviously we have to consider them, but the logistical aspects of, chasing a wildly drifting array are not as in play here as normally with my gear.
It works now. So my proposal yesterday, which doesn't have to be right, was that the right scale was between 25 and 100 kilometers. And that would be a sensible scale to put the drifters apart, because you have ocean response and atmospheric forcing. Doesn't have to be, but that was what I suggested.
Okay, but so your motivation for that is that you're then going to average those data? Or is that a scale that the atmosphere cares about? Because I think we've heard that the atmospheric scale might be bigger in terms of what it cares about, which would potentially argue for more distribution in a north-south sense. Good idea. Let's have some coffee and tea.